Dimensions of the Daf with Rabbi Mordechai Becher on JBS is made possible in part by the B.L. Manger Foundation in memory of Ben Manger.
Hi, I'm Mordechai Becher. Welcome to Jewish Broadcasting Service Dimensions of the Daf, in which we explore ideas from the Talmud, classic, contemporary, pretty much the Talmud. One of the terms for the Talmud is called Yam HaTalmud, which means the sea of Talmud, because it covers everything. You know, the sea covers 2/3 of the planet. The Talmud covers 100% of the planet. There is literally not a subject area of ethics, law, morality, spirituality, human interaction, etc., that is not covered in the Talmud in some way or other. Absolutely incredible. Okay, so today we are talking about fake news and privacy. And as you know, tremendous amount of information out there that we have the ability to harvest information like no other generation ever. When I hold my smartphone, I have a library of a few thousand books on my smartphone. Right? I have the Talmud, I have the Bible, I have commentaries, I have the codes of law. It's unbelievable what I have. I have Kindle with a whole bunch of fiction books. I can read the news, I can watch videos, I can have a conversation with my family in Israel. I can speak to my grandchildren. I can read them a book before they go to bed on the phone. We can see each other. It's amazing how much information is out there and surveillance cameras, privacy to some degree is a thing of the past. You buy something at a store, you buy something online, you look at your news feed, there'll be advertisements for similar products following you forever. Or until you buy the next product. So there's upsides and downsides to this, to the incredible access we have to other people, access to information, etc. Let me give you the upside of it. This is a quote you'll see on your screen from the American Commonwealth by James Bryce, Volume 2, page 355. Public opinion is a sort of atmosphere, fresh, keen, and full of sunlight, like that of the American cities, and this sunlight kills many of those noxious germs which are hatched where politicians congregate. That which, varying a once famous phrase we may call the genius of universal publicity, has some disagreeable results, but the wholesome ones are greater and more numerous. He says, you know what? When you shine light on people, it's much harder for them to hatch evil. You know, he's talking about politicians. No offense to any politicians here, but it's good to have public scrutiny of people in public office. It is good to have public knowledge of what's going on in the government and public office. Selfishness, injustice, cruelty, tricks, and jobs of all sorts, shun the light. To expose them is to defeat them. No serious evils, no rankling sore in the body politic can remain long concealed, and when disclosed, it is half destroyed. Now, he wrote that over 100 years ago, and at that time, they did not have the internet, social media, etc. And one of the positive features of it is that, yes, it does provide some level of safety. It provides some level of exposure of criminals. It exposes people who are dangerous. It exposes the people who abuse people. That's a good thing. Right? I think we want things to be out there in the open. We want things to be exposed to that sunlight, and because that's the type of thing, as he said, it destroys the noxious poisons that accumulate when people are huddled together in the dark. So there's certainly positive aspects. Knowledge available. I can get information about anything. I I need to find the information. I just type it into the computer in one of the search engines. Boom. All right, I got information. I want to find a synonym for a word I'm typing. Boom. I want to correct my grammar. There's another app to do that. Fantastic communication, etc. But there's a downside. And I would like to speak about some cautionary notes in the immortal words of Winnie the Pooh. Heffalumps and woozles, beware, beware. Let's look at some of the heffalumps and woozles here. First of all, Genesis 2:7. The Lord God formed the human dust from the earth, breathed into his nostrils the soul of life, and the human became a living soul. Vayhi ha'adam lenefesh chaya. The human became a living soul. It is interesting to note, Aramaic translation, Onkelos, who was a nephew of one of the Caesars who converted to Judaism and wrote a translation of the Bible into Aramaic, which is published in virtually every edition of the Hebrew Bible. And he translates a living soul as a speaking soul, nefesh memalala. So Onkelos understood that which represents the essence of the human soul is our ability to speak. The ability of the human being to communicate concepts, philosophy, morals, ideas, etc., poetry, so on and so forth, incredible. And that's what defines the human being, nefesh memalala, the speaking soul. And it's interesting that the medieval Jewish philosophers, when they talked about the different classifications of everything in the world, they'd do domain, which means inanimate matter, like a stone. Someach, which means a plant, a growing plant. Chai, a living thing, an animal. And the next one was medaber, the speaker, meaning the human being. Now, that power of speech, we have to be very careful with. Have a look at Leviticus 1:1. It's the opening line of Leviticus. And by the way, this particular verse is repeated in slightly different formats over 70 times in the 5 books of Moses. The verse states in Hebrew, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe le'emor. Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe le'emor. God spoke to Moses, le'emor, to say. The Gemara, as you can see here, Yoma 4b, it says this: God called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting to say, from here we see that one whose friend has told him something is prohibited from speaking of it to others until given permission to do so. Okay, let's try to analyze this. The Talmud is bothered by the repetition of say. God spoke to Moses to say. Why does it have to say to say? It could have said, there's too many says here, but you get the picture, right? It could have written it this following: God spoke to Moses and then told me what he said. The addition of God spoke to Moses to say is a little interesting. So the Talmud understands that phrase to say as permission that God was giving Moses to convey further what he just told him. So God, had it just said God spoke to Moses and then what he said, Moses would not have been allowed to convey that, to transfer that, to transmit that to anyone else. So therefore, every time God spoke to Moses and wanted him to convey the message further, he had to give him permission to do so. So he says, God spoke to Moses to say. Those 2 words, to say, in Hebrew, one word, le'emor, is permission to say these words. So now, the Gemara has a brilliant analysis here. The Gemara says, clearly, in the absence of permission to convey these words, it must have been prohibited to do so. Which means that Moses had to assume confidentiality until he was told by God, this you can say. The Gemara says that's all very nice, but we're not prophets. God's not speaking to us. So how is it relevant to me? The Gemara says, because that's teaching you a lesson in all communication. Meaning, anytime someone tells you something privately, as if they say it out in public, different story, but if someone tells you something privately, you have to assume that information is confidential unless you are told otherwise. Now, I know that for many of us, when someone tells us something, we probably think it's not confidential unless they tell me, listen, by the way, that was confidential. then the next 5 people I'll tell them, by the way, that was a secret. Right? However, the truth is the status quo, the baseline for us is it's confidential. I assume it's confidential unless I'm told otherwise. So that means any information that someone gives me, someone's leaving his job, someone is moving to a different neighborhood, someone is becoming a member of a different synagogue. All these pieces of information, while they sound innocuous and they sound, but someone tells me any of those things, I must assume confidentiality. If I would like to tell someone else, I must ask them, listen, can I tell anyone else that? If they say yes, fine. But if I didn't ask them, I must assume that it's confidential. That's incredible. That means that the Torah places tremendous value on privacy and tremendous value on confidentiality. In fact, there's a damage. When the Talmud discusses different types of damage, there's damage that you cause by assault and battery. There's damage that might be caused by your property, your cow runs amok, your dog bites someone. There's damage caused by your property, your car, the brakes fail on your car, it rolls into someone else's car, etc. There's damage caused by fire, right? A spark goes to your barbecue, burns someone's, right? Whatever. All these things, damage. There's a type of damage called hezek re'iyah, which is damage by seeing. Damage by seeing. Let's have a look at this source, Talmudic Encyclopedia. It's called Damage by Sight. Jeffrey Rosen, professor at University of Pennsylvania, an expert on privacy and confidentiality in American law, he actually calls his book The Unwanted Gaze, G-A-Z-E, by the way, The Unwanted Gaze, meaning, and he quotes in the front page of the book, the dedication where he quotes from the Talmudic Encyclopedia the following paragraph. Even the smallest intrusion into private space by the unwanted gaze causes damage because the injury caused by seeing cannot be measured. So the Talmudic Encyclopedia tells us that the damage by looking when you're not supposed to look, by intruding on someone's privacy, might be worse than actual physical damage. Because physical damage to the car, even to the person, there's a possibility of a set financial amount. You know, how much work did you lose because I broke your finger, right? That's measurable. What's the lessening of your value as a piano player because I broke your finger? That's measurable. What's your car worth now? What was it worth before I damaged it? You can measure that. But the invasion of your privacy, the unwanted gaze into your backyard, etc., that's an immeasurable damage. And that is something which is of paramount value in Judaism. So now we have two sources. Number one, we have the idea of everything is confidential unless told otherwise, but the assumption is confidentiality. Secondly, that intrusion into someone's privacy is a prohibition, and it's considered to be in the Talmud a actual damage, maybe even more severe than physical damage because of the intangibility and the immeasurability of it. Now, there's also another issue with social media, with the internet, with things being able to be filmed and immediately put up on whether it's TikTok or YouTube, etc., and to be viewed by millions, literally around the world. We have to be very careful also about the truth of things. So Exodus 20:13, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. That, by the way, for those who are unfamiliar with it, thanks to the ACLU, is in the Ten Commandments. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Testifying falsely, and understood from this also, the Talmud says, is a general prohibition against all manner of falsehood, which is going to cause damage to someone. But even falsehood which won't cause damage, Exodus 23:7, midvar sheker tirchak, which means distance yourself from falsehood. And what's interesting is, this is, as far as I know, the only prohibition in the Bible which doesn't just say don't, but it says distance yourself. Usually the Torah says, thou shalt not. Lo, al, don't, lo, not, etc. But very rarely, and I think this is the only prohibition, the Torah says, midvar sheker tirchak, which means stay far away from it. Because falsehood is so despicable, so disgusting, the Torah wants to stay far away from it. And we also repeat it in Leviticus 19, you shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. And here, the Talmud says, stealing, dealing falsely or lying to one another is not only what we think. In other words, if you would ask someone to define theft, they'd probably say taking something that's not yours. And that would be true, right? That is, right? If I take your wallet, if I steal your car, etc., that's theft. Clear, it belongs to you, I took it away, theft. But there are other more subtle forms of theft, which are deception. And in the Talmud, that's called genevat da'at. Genevas das. Geneva means theft. Da'at means of the mind. Theft of perception. If I give you a false impression, even if there's no specific damage, but I give you an impression that I have, I don't know, this qualification when I don't. I give you the impression that I am giving you an honor when I'm not. I give you the impression I'm doing you a favor when I'm not. So I haven't really damaged you, but that's considered a form of theft. Rashi, by the way, the great commentary on both the Bible and the Talmud, Rashi says there's even a form of theft which you transgress by giving someone a present. If I give you a present, I bought it from the dollar store, so it's worth $1. I put it in a beautiful Neiman Marcus bag with tissue paper around it. I print up a sticker that it's made by starving Hungarian peasants in the Carpathian Mountains and stick it on the side. And then I give it to you and you think, oh, wow, spent $200 on me. So Rashi says that's theft. What's theft? I just gave you something. The theft is that you now feel gratitude towards me of $200 worth of gratitude. You feel that I did you a tremendous gift, gave you a tremendous gift. In fact, I spent $1, which means $199 worth of gratitude I stole. So that's a form of theft. So truth as a value, even if there's no damage, I didn't take anything from you. Even if it's just the taking of gratitude, and even if I'm not taking anything, I'm just falsifying the situation, prohibited. Midvar sheker tirchak, distance yourself from a lie. Have a look at the next source, which is the Sefer HaChinuch, Mitzvah 74, Sefer HaChinuch. A rabbi who is a Levi from Barcelona. Listen to what he says. This is the commandment for a judge not to hear the claim of a litigant when it is not in front of his fellow litigant. So there's two people having a dispute. The judge is only allowed to listen to one when the other is there. He says the judge should not hear the claim of one when he's not in front of his adversary. The reason, and this is what he says, because people will speak idle words when not in front of their adversary. Yes, it's much easier to lie when the person you're lying about is not there. When the other guy is standing right there in front of you in court, you hopefully, will have a little more caution about what you say. And the judge is commanded about this so as not to bring the untruths of one of them into his soul. Because when he hears one without the other there, and the other guy, and this guy's lying through his teeth, which is usually where you lie. Unfortunately, this will enter into the heart of the judge, and he'll accept this as true. And he says this. You can skip to the next paragraph. The root of this commandment is well known. As falsehood is abominable and vile in the eyes of all, there is nothing more disgusting than it. Falsehood. Malediction and curse are in the house of its lovers. God, may he be blessed, is a truthful God. Everything that with him is true. Blessing is only found and resting upon those that make themselves similar to God in their deeds, to be truthful like he is truthful, to be merciful like he is merciful, and to be purveyors of kindness as he is kind. Regarding anyone whose deeds are the opposite of his good traits and masters of falsehood, exactly the opposite of his traits, he says, such a person, no blessing, just malediction and curse. And it's interesting, he points out God's seal is in fact truth. And he says that therefore the Torah warns us to distance ourselves from falsehood, as it is written, from a false matter distance yourself. Behold, he says, the Torah uses the expression of distancing due to being so disgusting. It didn't mention this regarding anything else. It doesn't say distance yourself from lobster. It says don't eat it. It doesn't say distance yourself from transgression of Shabbat. It says just keep Shabbat, but distance yourself from falsehood. Absolutely fascinating. Whether there's damage to someone or no damage, the very fact that one is engaging in falsehood is in itself something despicable, something which is the antithesis of a relationship with God, who is called truth. Hashem Elokim Emet, as the verse says, God is true. And the Talmud says, Chotamo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the seal, when you stamp something, the seal of God is truth. So, and it's interesting, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto talks about lying as a sickness that has spread far-reachingly among men. He wrote this in the 18th century. There are various levels of this sin. Some people whose profession is lying. That's all they do. You look at their feed on YouTube or whatever it is, lie. So, there are those who are similar. They just don't really care that much. They invent stories. They manufacture incidents which never occurred. They interlace things with exaggeration, etc. Not appropriate. He says there are some people who it's a little milder, right? They're just not habitual liars. They just don't take too much care about the accuracy of their words. And he says, indeed, this is what we have to be very careful. And it's interesting, he points out a story in which a great rabbi, Rav Safra, was praying. He was saying the Shema, so he was totally focused, and he wasn't allowed to speak in the middle of it. A guy came over and said, listen, I want to buy this thing from you. I'm willing to pay you $200. Now, Rav Safra, in his mind, said, yeah, that sounds fair. Anyway, when he finishes, the guy didn't realize that Rav Safra was praying, was thinking about prayer. He thought, he doesn't like the price. So he upped the price. He said $300. Rav Safra is still sitting there praying. The person doesn't realize that Rav Safra is praying. He thinks, oh boy, wow, he's driving a hard bargain. He says $400. He finally goes up to $500, $600. And when Safra finishes praying, he says, yes, I'll sell the article. It'll be $100. The guy said, what? This is amazing. I offered you $500. The Rav Safra said, that is true. But in my mind, when you said $100, I accepted that. He said, I'm not going to go back on what I thought. That's at a very lofty level of sincerity and of truth. Even the truth that he didn't say out loud. Just some truth which in his mind he accepted, he felt obligated him, etc. So there is this idea. Now, look, obviously you are allowed to give information to people which will protect them. If you know there's someone dangerous out there, if you know there's someone who is a risk out there, you're allowed to say it. But there are conditions. If you have a look on I've summarized some of the conditions from the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim, he wrote a number of volumes on the laws of speech, ethical speech. So in his laws, he says it is permissible to speak negatively about someone, but only for a positive purpose. And he gives a bunch of conditions, which rarely are fulfilled. A, you must witness it firsthand or be absolutely clear that it's true. It can't be just based on hearsay or rumours. B, not to jump to conclusions. Don't go beyond what you know. C, you should try to communicate directly with this person, if it's not dangerous to you, first. If this person you think is engaged in dangerous behaviour, risky behaviour, he endangers other people, say something to him. That's not always possible, but that's what you should try first. Don't exaggerate. If the guy had a minor assault charge after a fight in a bar when he was drunk, you're not permitted to say that he is a violent axe murderer. Okay? You're supposed to have pure intentions, meaning your intention is supposed to be only to distance the person you're telling from harm. Listen, I wouldn't become a roommate with this guy because he's a violent axe murderer, right? So maybe you should get a different roommate. Or if you know you have a guy, an employee, who stole from you and you fired him, and you know that someone else wants to employ him, you should warn him. Again, you know personally, your intention is only for good. Don't exaggerate, but you should tell him, right? You want to save him from harm. If there are no other options, I mean, if you could somehow accomplish the same result of protecting this person from the one who's causing damage in some other way, that you shouldn't say anything, and no undue damage. In other words, your information does not cause damage the guy doesn't deserve. If by sending this information you're going to destroy his life, that's not allowed. Right? You're allowed to protect someone from having a dangerous roommate, an untrustworthy worker, an incompetent doctor, whatever it is, but you cannot cause more damage to the person than is mandated in this particular case. And obviously, and this is not so obvious, but the information you get should not come from the person's enemy. That's type of obvious, because someone who doesn't like them will not tell you the truth and will probably exaggerate. So I'm just pointing this out. We are obligated to take care of our friends and of people, right, and to protect them from damage. And sometimes that requires conveying negative information. But it must be done with the correct intentions, without exaggeration, with personal knowledge, when other options have failed. So that's okay. We cannot hide behind ethics of speech and say, I didn't tell her this guy is a complete creep, and I let her date him or even get engaged. No, we have a responsibility to protect people, but we also have a responsibility to do it in the correct way, which is keeping in mind these laws. So we spoke about confidentiality as being a prime importance, repeated in the Torah so many times. In this central verse, God spoke to Moses to say, I have to assume confidentiality unless told otherwise. We spoke about hezek re'iyah, damage by sight, meaning invasion of privacy is in and of itself a damage, perhaps even as bad, if not worse, than tangible physical damage. We spoke about the not lying, and lying meaning even when there's no damage to someone, or even when I'm giving someone a gift, just deception itself is a form of theft and lies. We spoke about lies as being the one area in which the Torah says, distance yourself, stay far away. It doesn't just say don't, it says stay far away. We saw it as being something which distances you from God, because his essence is truth, and he represents truth, and his seal is truth, and a person who's engaged in lies very far away. We saw there's different levels of lies, and of course we saw that there are cases where you are allowed to convey confidential information, but it's only in a very strictly limited circumstance in which you are saving someone else from damage, in which you are saving someone else from pain, and without exaggeration, and so on, with the appropriate intention in mind. That's a little bit of an introduction. Of course, I think there's a positive value in information being out there. Just the more we know, that usually the better, and also the light that it shines upon people who are doing the negative things. But we also have to be very, very cautious about how we use it. As Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg put it, he says he sees social media as like fire. Fire is fantastic. You can cook with fire, you can heat with fire, you can light things with fire, you can light the room with fire, but you have to treat it with care. You have to treat it with caution. You have to treat it with respect for the damage that it can do. Same is true of social media. We can use it, but we have to treat it with respect, caution, and be wary of the damage that it can do. This is Mordechai Becher. If you'd like to see, I actually have a chapter in my book, Gateway to Judaism, available on Amazon and artscroll.com. I have a chapter about the laws of speech, ethics of speech and lying, and so on and so forth. And so you can read it. There are people still out there who read, so please do that. And tune in again to Jewish Broadcasting Service, Dimensions of the Daf, Mordechai Becher. Hopefully we'll see you next episode.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.